Poinsettia, Chapter 31. It was snowing again. The moon and lamps outside shone so bright. The drapes were drawn open, allowing the silvery light to flood the otherwise dark mansion. Gavin stood before the window and watched the snowfall. He waited quietly for the relieving moment of the bell toll of midnight from his clocks and the distant din within the city. The new year would finally come. Out would go old man 1897, and in would come baby 1898. In a few short years, a new century would be upon him. He wondered what marvels would await him then. In his hand, he held a glass of Merlot wine. It was a bad year, and it left a bitter taste in his mouth. Still, he felt no need to waste it, and he would suffer through this one bottle before daring to open a more desirable one. Who didn't prefer a good year? However, this past year's experience had proven to him that it was worth taking the bad years with the good years. This glass, this bottle, it would symbolize just that. From the many good wines he had sipped upon, it was due time to sip happily upon a bad one. He gently swirled the contents of his glass as he reflected upon that year that would die in a few minutes. A lot had certainly happened in that bit of time. It was bittersweet, really. Some things were good, such as his wonderful time spent in India with the company of his friend, a fellow vampire, an optimist able to understand and handle his gloomy melancholy. He met such wonderful people and had rediscovered many forgotten passions. These were good things. There were also bad things that he had to note. There was the corruption, the humiliation, and the loss. These were bad things. Still, every experience in his life prepared him for something later on. That was certainly his thought on the matter. He had replaced the members of the Board of Trustees. They were not necessarily wealthy philanthropists, but they were good people who put the children first. Who did he invite first to the new board? Who else but the ever-loyal Sister Bernadette? With her there was absolutely no question that the bottom line was not profit. It was the well-being of those children in her care. It had been a full week since he had last seen Danny. It had been since that Christmas evening when he had begrudgingly and regrettably returned her home to the hospital. It hadn't been very long, but it had certainly felt like an eternity to him. For a creature in which time meant little to nothing, that was quite an achievement. Angus, of course, had far more contact. He was able to venture out during the day, after all, and interact more freely with her and the other children. Perhaps Gavin envied him for that a little. The widowed Laura Borders still resided in Gavin's home. She was free to return to the house at any time, but she was also welcome to stay as long as she liked. She and Angus had become rather good friends. She was a young lady, after all, and still had a lot of pep in her. She was a good companion for the lad when he could not venture out. Gavin could tell that they were growing gradually close. He also knew that Angus was also no product of time. He wouldn't be surprised, long after the grieving was over, that there would be sparks between the two. Perhaps a deeper relationship. Angus was no nobleman. There would be many an issue to address if that time ever came. Laura was absent on this night, however. Another wealthy family was throwing a New Year's ball. She was the old widow Marion McLean. Her much older husband had passed away several years prior and left her quite a vast fortune. She, like her husband, was a noble individual of charitable and high-class events. Gavin had been invited to attend as well, though he politely refused his invitation. However, he insisted that Laura should take the time to enjoy herself outside of the house if she felt up to it. She apparently did. She was well-balanced, grieving her losses, but also taking time to be social enough to remove the warrant for concern on her behalf. He sipped his wine, drowning out the silence momentarily with his gentle slurp. The only other noise to be heard was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. He glanced over at the time. It was midnight. Only 15 minutes remained before 1898 officially rolled in. Now would be a good time to make a New Year's resolution, wouldn't it? He sighed as he tried to think of just the right thing. What could he possibly want? He smiled and chuckled inwardly. Yes, he had it now. He then raised his glass as if to toast. But there nobody but Old Man Winter outside and Jack Frost at his windowsill. Here's to remembering, but not dwelling on past events. Here's to looking forward to future joys, overcoming future troubles, and creating new experiences and adventures. Respect to the old, and welcome to the new. With that resolution made, he gulped down the remainder of the glass of wine. He made a bit of a face and let out a somewhat disgusted sigh. Ah, that's nasty medicine. He set his glass down as the chimes and din of midnight finally sounded. He poured some more wine as he made another face. He almost didn't want to drink it. Should old acquaintance be forgot? He took a swig and shook his face. Oh, wow, that's enough. It's New Year, and I need me some good wine. Good year for a new good year. He migrated into his den and sat in his chair before the big fireplace. He took a deep breath and sighed with contentment. All was well. He hummed yet another sigh and looked up above. My dearest Clementine McVeigh, I wish you a happy New Year. Best wishes to you, my darling Caradwyn, and the ever-loyal Frank Borders. See me through another year, and I shall remember and love you all well. He raised his glass and finished it off and set it down. That was enough of that. A creak then suddenly caught his attention. He tensed only slightly and leaned forward in his chair. Who is it? Immediately he relaxed and sat back once more. Ah, Angus, you've come home. Aye, he replied as he knelt just outside the doorway. Sorry I wasna here when you woke. I wanted to bring you a New Year's present. A present? He asked. For me? He couldn't help but chuckle. What did you bring me, old friend? A dead cat? A bone you had buried in the backyard? Angus was admittedly rather amused with Gavin, and himself. I got you something much better, master. Do you want it now? Gavin finally grew curious enough to turn around and look behind his chair at the werewolf in the doorway. Don't tease me, Angus. You've already piqued my curiosity. Do get on with it. Angus stood with another laugh. You will love this, master. I think, out of all the things I could ever think to give you, this one be the most precious. Gavin faced the fireplace again and sat properly in his chair. He waved his hand to signal that Angus could approach to deliver his gift. He could hear him slip back into the hall, and began to get a little irritated at how drawn out this became. After a few moments, he felt a strange and familiar sensation. It sent chills up his spine, and he couldn't help but gasp as his breath caught in his throat. He flung himself up and around, only to see, not Angus before him, but Danny, Bumblebee in tow, in a simple dress. Happy New Year, Mr. Gavin. Danny? I don't understand. What are you doing here? I brought her home, Angus smiled. He gave Danny a gentle push forward and coaxed her to approach the lord of the manor. Home? Danny approached him. He had to sit back in his chair, but she came around before the fireplace so that she could look into his face. Mr. Angus said you wanted me to come back. I don't want you to be sad and lonely. So he said he'd bring me to my new home, and here I am. Me and Bumblebee. Gavin softened his features and processed the information given to him. I see. I'm never going to be Caradwyn, and I don't want to be. I'm Danny, and I want to be Danny. Will you be all right with that? Gavin offered her his hand and invited her into his lap, where she snuggled against him. Bumblebee remained in her arms, nestled lovingly against her. I think that would be fine, he replied. I love Caradwyn because she is Caradwyn. I love Danny because she is Danny. She hugged him and buried her face into his chest. Mr. Gavin? Yes? Would it be all right if I called you Papa? He felt his heart melt in his chest. He closed his eyes and embraced her again lovingly with a gentle squeeze. Oh, Danny, nothing would make me happier in this world. She straddled his lap and wrapped her hands about his neck to give him an even bigger hug. He gladly accepted this affection from her. It felt good. He felt a great wave of relief, as though everything felt complete again. He gently kissed her neck. She was now where she belonged. Angus had indeed brought him the most precious gift he could ever want. He wasn't sure if he should thank him, or how. He had brought her back to him, and this time he was determined to never let her go. Even though he didn't look back at him, he could tell that he was still standing there, and that he was grinning proudly from ear to ear. He remained silent, happy to gleam in his master's happiness. It was his, too, for he, too, loved the child. She belonged with them, and she was with them. She was their Poinsettia, bitten by cold. She was bound to die. Now, in warm and loving hands, she could finally blossom.